Look at what happened last week in Sweden. Far-right populists made large gains in the election, almost 18% in Sweden. Globalization has created so many losers and they now vote for the populists. But that's dead wrong. That this happens in Sweden as well should make you question some of these simplistic ideas about socioeconomics and populism. Because Sweden is an equal society, a rich society with low unemployment, where real wages have increased fast. The political psychologist Karen Stenner has shown that a large part of the population has an authoritarian predisposition, and this gets triggered when they think that there is a threat to their community. Political leaders let them down, there is political polarization, or perhaps a financial crisis or a migration crisis. But interestingly, this is all about collective threats, not individual losses. Stenner finds that authoritarians who experience economic troubles or other personal problems, they become less authoritarian and intolerant than others do. So Stenner thinks that their individual problems distract them from the collective threats that would otherwise have turned them into nationalists and authoritarians. It's not the economy, stupid. Sweden, what a great nation, where no one is poor and everybody's healthy. We've solved the problems, we've squared the circle. We prove that big government can result in great prosperity. No, that's dead wrong. You know the old joke, how do you end up with a small fortune? You start with a large fortune and then you waste a lot of it. And that's the Swedish experience. We got rich once upon a time because of free markets. Between 1850 and 1950, Sweden's income per capita increased eightfold, and taxes were lower than 20% of GDP, lower than in other Western countries, and much like the United States. Only then, when we were already rich, did we start to build a large welfare state. And that hurt us. In 1974, Sweden was 50% richer than the average OECD country. 20 years later, that gap had halved, and it ended in a terrible economic crisis. Sweden fell from being the fourth richest country to the 13th. Despite its reputation for being a workers' paradise, real wages were stagnant for 20 years. Then we reintroduced free market reforms. And then, in the next 20 years, real wages increased 70%. So Sweden is much like other places. Free markets worked here. It made us rich, but then big government almost ruined us. But reform since then got us back on track. You Swedes are like Robin Hood. You take from the rich and give to the poor, especially in good social services for the poor. That's dead wrong. The dirty little secret of Sweden's high taxes is that we don't squeeze the rich, we squeeze the poor. You can't take that much from high earners and businesses because the economy needs them too much, and they're too few. So the national government in Sweden takes almost as much in VAT and excise taxes as it does in income taxes. And those are regressive taxes on consumption, where the poor pay exactly the same amount as the rich. And the income tax is high even on very low incomes because the poor are loyal taxpayers. They don't migrate, they don't dodge. The top 10% of earners in the United States paid more than 45% of all income taxes according to an OECD study, whereas the Swedish top 10% paid less than 27% of all taxes. As a Social Democratic Minister of Finance said when he implemented a special tax exemption for the rich, "Sure, it is unfair, but we have no better solution." Unlike American socialists, Scandinavian socialists have concluded that you can have a big government or you can make the rich pay for it all. Pick one. You can't have both. Market concentration is up, but productivity and investment is down. So it seems like the big corporations are getting bigger and lazier and keep the competitors away. We need antitrust policies to break them up and make the economy work again. No, that's dead wrong. The data shows that the biggest businesses aren't slowing the economy down. On the contrary, they are speeding it up so much that others can't keep up with it. We have missed some of their investment because more of it now comes in the form of ideas, software, algorithms, innovative business practices and intellectual property. These things, intangibles, are harder to measure, but we do know that this is being driven by the industry leaders. Now, there are some examples where this results in market power and markups, like patents in the healthcare sector, but in other areas of the economy, consumer industries, the tech sector, it results in productivity gains. In other words, they don't grow because they don't face competition. They grow because they beat the competition. Policies that attack them are in fact policies that punish productivity-enhancing investments and punish the consumers. Don't put too much trust in antitrust. Sweden and other Scandinavian countries lead the world in trust. Proof that generous welfare states result in trust between people, even strangers. Nope, that's dead wrong. Sure, Scandinavians are much more likely to say that most people can be trusted, but you know something interesting? People of Scandinavian ancestry in the United States are also much more likely to say that most people can be trusted. And this seems to suggest that Scandinavians were more trusting 150 years ago when they started to move to the United States, 100 years before the welfare state. So trust must have been the result of something else. Perhaps our history of few conflicts, few invasions, little or no feudalism. International comparisons show that neither larger welfare states nor income equality have a causal effect on trust. So the welfare state did not create trust, but perhaps trust created the welfare state. To accept that the government redistributes resources on a large scale, you should expect politicians not to waste it and recipients to deserve it. In a more corrupt place, with less trust, where people just take whatever they can get, a generous welfare state wouldn't result in trust. It would result in ruin. Social media platforms remove right-wing content. And as Donald Trump points out, Google rigs its results to promote anti-Trump news. We have to regulate big tech to save free speech. No, we don't. That's dead wrong. This supposed bias in Google results actually disappears the moment you control for how popular and trustworthy these media outlets are, according to Americans. Yet more people get results from Washington Post than, say, Breitbart, but that's because more people read and trust the Post. Yes, sometimes platforms remove content, like rubbish conspiracy theories. So, that's not a free speech issue. The right to speak freely does not include the right to be taken seriously, and it certainly doesn't include an obligation for others to supply you with a platform. I think it's often counterproductive to remove content, but that's for the owners to decide, if you believe in property rights and free speech. My friend Stuart reminded me of the dinner scene in Atlas Shrugged, when Hank Rearden is forced to listen to his brother Philip going on about his whole way of life and how miserable it is. Philip, say any of that again, and you will find yourself out on the streets right now. But, says Philip, don't I have any freedom of speech? And Hank responds, in your house, not mine. China. China. China, 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 China. Here I go again about China. And it's dead wrong. The Chinese didn't eat our jobs for lunch. Sure, there are studies that have shown that Chinese imports reduces jobs in the particular sector affected by that competition. But they only looked at direct head-on competition from China. So one refrigerator bought from a Chinese factory results in one not bought from an American company. But that's just one aspect of trade. Lots of trade is in intermediate goods, supplies and inputs that companies need to make their own product. So sometimes we do buy a refrigerator from China, but more often the American refrigerator company buys cables and light bulbs from Chinese factories so that they can produce a better and cheaper refrigerator themselves. And here's the thing, this expands production and employment in the US as well. A new study shows that if we account for this whole supply chain perspective as well, the net effect of trade with China is more American jobs. The average US region sees a net job increase of 1.3% a year relative to a hypothetical American region with no trade with China. 75% of US workers experience real wage growth as a result of this. So a trade war with China is a war on American workers. Outsourcing government services is over. The collapse of big British contractors like Carillion and the reduced savings from outsourcing proves that it's time for the government to step back in. Nope, that's dead wrong. Look, I don't want to exaggerate this. Outsourcing, everything from handling public payrolls to cleaning government offices, is not that sexy. I'm a classical liberal. I want the government to be smaller, not just let somebody else run its errands. But what the government does, it should at least do efficiently. One international study showed that outsourcing saved 6 to 12% of the cost. And if you handle billions, reducing the cost of around a tenth is not peanuts. That's one of the reasons why some contractors fail. The margins they have is now so small. But these savings from outsourcing are declining over time. So can we say that, yeah, outsourcing was once useful, but now we don't have to do it anymore? Now, that's not the way it works. If you started losing weight last year because you started doing exercise, you can't say that this year, today, I'm not losing that much more weight from exercise, so perhaps I can stop doing it. You have to stick to a healthy lifestyle in order to stay fit. And you need constant exposure to competition to stay lean and mean. The middle class is being squeezed. US wages have not increased since the 1970s. If we had only slowed down the pace of technological progress and exposed our companies to less foreign competition, we would all have benefited. Dead wrong. It's true that blue-collar wages have not increased since the 1970s if you discount non-wage benefits. But that debate about wage stagnation ignores purchasing power, what money can buy. And that's really what we're interested in, if wages are supposed to be something more than just a number to impress our friends with. And the benefit of trade, competition and technological change is that it increases that buying power. For example, in 1979, it took 75 hours of work to afford a refrigerator. Today, it takes no more than 36 hours. And that refrigerator is also much better and consumes only a third of the energy it did. And in the same terms, the cost of a TV set, a vacuum cleaner, a coffee maker or a toaster is now 80% lower than it was in the late 1970s. To make our paychecks go even further, we need more trade, competition and technological progress, not less. I live in one of the best countries on the planet, Sweden. We tax and we spend and we have a huge government, and we're one of the world's richest countries. You should be more like us. Dead wrong. Sweden got rich first, with free trade and an open economy before we had the big government. In 1950, Sweden was already one of the world's richest countries, and back then taxes were lower in Sweden than in the United States. Only then did we start expanding the government dramatically. And you know what happened then? We started losing. From having been the fourth richest country in the world in 1970, 25 years later, we were only the 14th richest. And no new jobs had been created in the private sector. It all ended in a terrible crisis. Since then, Sweden has become successful again, but only after a new reform period, with more deregulation and free trade than in other countries, with lower taxes, school vouchers and partial privatization of the pension system. Sure, Sweden is great. I love it here. But be careful so that you imitate the stuff that brought us wealth and not the stuff that almost brought us ruin. The world's 62 richest individuals own more than the world's 3.5 billion poorest combined. Surely the big problem in our world is inequality, and the only way to help the poor is to take from the rich. Dead wrong. The big problem in the world is not inequality, it's poverty. You know, my young daughter has a total fortune of, I'd say, $15. In fact, that makes her richer than the world's poorest 2 billion people combined. That sounds absurd, but that's because those 2 billion people have no monetary assets whatsoever. And that is the problem. If we distributed the assets of the 62 richest individuals to the world's poorest half, they would get only $500 each. That would only increase their income by 20%, and only for 1 year. The only way to sustainably reduce poverty is to invest in future productivity and wealth. And interestingly, that only happens in the countries that allows poor individuals with great ideas to become super rich. The problem in the world is not that my daughter has $15, or that she will become even richer in the future, or that some become super rich. The problem is that so many people are still desperately poor. It's bizarre that we're now suddenly supposed to trade with vicious dictatorships like Iran and Cuba. Don't we have a responsibility to try and undermine these despots with trade sanctions? Dead wrong. Actually, sanctions often strengthen dictators, since it gives them an outside factor to blame for all the problems. And it also limits pluralism within societies and allows the rulers to profit from all the trade flows that will go on nonetheless. Sanctions allowed Iran's Revolutionary Guard to seize control of almost a third of the country's production. And in Cuba, the Castro brothers took control of just about the entire economy. The reason why they wear military uniforms rather than tailored suits is not poverty. It seems more like a peculiar fashion statement. In fact, the most economically open countries are 3 times more likely to also enjoy full democratic and civil rights as those that are economically closed. Yes, we should try to undermine despots, and the best way to do that is to trade with them. Massive leaks have revealed how the rich hide their money in tax havens. Therefore, they expose the greed and immorality at the heart of global capitalism. Dead wrong. In fact, it seems more like greedy government is being exposed. In the leaked Panama Papers, we find more political figures than Forbes billionaires, 5 times more. The documents read like a who's who of kleptocrats from countries like Russia and China and Iraq, and includes enough Middle East royalty to fill a palace. The more power officials have, the more they grab. And that tells us something about the benefits of tax havens. Entrepreneurs who create value for all of us by creating new goods and services and technologies are at the mercy of such governments. That they have at least a chance of going somewhere where taxes are lower restrains the greed of governments. We all react to high taxes. Some stop investing and taking risks altogether. Perhaps it's better that some continue doing so, but register elsewhere. Countries with stronger rule of law and lower taxes have fewer tax fugitives. As the 19th century economist Frederick Bastiat put it, the surest way to have the laws respected is to make the laws respectable. Humanity has wiped out 60% of all animals since 1970. I learned that from The Guardian and other media outlets as they reported on the Living Planet Index of the World Wildlife Fund. But that is dead wrong. This index is not about the total number of animals lost or the number of species lost. Don't take my word for it. Listen to this. Does this mean we have lost 60% of animals? Well, luckily, no. An average trend in population change is not an average of total numbers of animals lost. Why should you trust that particular interpretation? Because that is the World Wildlife Fund in their own words, but hidden away in the technical appendix, and few of us make it that far. This index looks at more than 16,000 animal populations, and a population is a pocket of a particular animal in one geographical area. And about half of those populations increase in size, about half of them decline in size. And on average, especially since they started to include more amphibians and fish populations, they declined by 60%. That is indeed bad. We humans have a tendency to make a mess out of things, of animal habitats and of scientific reporting. Hey, wait! Don't forget to subscribe to our channel here and check out these other videos. And check back next Wednesday for a new Dead Wrong from Free to Choose Network. A senior British surgeon recently complained that young surgery students spend too much time in front of screens, so they lose practical skills like sewing and stitching. This got a lot of coverage because it combines two of our favorite pastimes: worrying about screens and complaining about the young. But it is dead wrong. This hasn't been studied much, but what we do know points in the other direction. One study didn't find much of a difference when it comes to manual dexterity, but it did find a major difference in reaction time. Frequent smartphone users were much better. Another study found that surgeons who play lots of video games work faster and make fewer errors. These are small studies with small effects, but nothing points to screens damaging core skills of surgery. And many surgeons claim that they learned dexterity and hand-eye coordination by playing video games. One story described a senior surgeon struggling with retrieving a loose body arthroscopically. A junior doctor on his first mission then stepped in, and he plucked it out with ease. "How did you do it?" they asked. "Nintendo skills," he replied. Hey, wait! Don't forget to subscribe to our channel here and check out these other videos. And check back next Wednesday for a new Dead Wrong from Free to Choose Network. If the rest of the world wants women to rise to the top in business, you should do what we have done in Sweden and the other Nordic countries, with generous welfare states and egalitarian policies. Surprisingly wrong. We have a long tradition of gender equality in Nordic countries, but it seems like we in some ways are holding women back from the most important positions. The proportion of women amongst directors and chief executives is just 13% in Nordic countries, compared to 21% in Western Europe. The likelihood of women reaching managerial position is almost twice as large in the United States as it is in Nordic countries. Why? Well, public sector monopolies reduces the chances for women to start businesses, and very generous maternity leave means that many stay away from work life for a long time. Very high taxes makes it punishingly expensive to buy household services, so women have to juggle work, household and kids. There's nothing wrong with Nordic attitudes to equality, but it seems like there's something wrong with our welfare states.